Hi, everyone. Welcome back.
Hello.
I hope everyone is doing great. I know me and Chris are. Today, I think we're going to talk you a bit through one of the works that I think is some of your favorite works, if I'm not mistaken.
It's hard. You're putting me a bit on a spot when you're saying favorite, but I definitely do appreciate this a lot. And it's definitely a work that is, I hope we will have a bit to say about.
And do you hope or do you have a bit to say about it?
Well, I chose my phrasing quite carefully there.
Did you? Okay. Is that why I'm picking up on you? Because you're so careful?
Well, it's in the future, so it's hard to say yet, isn't it?
Well, that's the thing. It's all about the information one provides.
Well, I did provide the correct information.
All right, enough shenanigans. This is not scripted, by the way. We're just, I think that if one would to summarize my and your relationship in a nutshell, I think we just love to put each other in quite awkward spots.
I guess that's fair.
Well, I said it's one of your favorite pieces because you have been quite enthusiastic about it, and not about just this particular piece, but I made a tiny series. I have this thing that when I have an idea, I have to execute it a couple of times before I am sure that it is a that before I'm confident to stand behind it, I guess. So you have in several occasions.
And then you need a few more pieces to solidify that feeling that you're feeling.
I'm a Virgo, don't pick on me. Like I get so insecure and then I have to work hard.
And then we have 8 of them. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was about to say, like, luckily for us, none of us want children.
All right.
I'm sorry, I'm in a bit of in a goofy mood today. But as with everything, I think the most interesting dimension of life is that its peculiarities are hidden in plain sight. And I've spoken a couple of times, I've said that I'm very interested. That, like, if there is one thing that really drives me, it is understanding how threads of this world function. It has taken me a long time to go about this and come to the place where I could acknowledge myself through those means. But ultimately, I am just very fascinated how the cogwheels of this world work and how this dimension of push and pull exists at all to begin with. How two people can feel energy between them and interact based upon that. I'm fascinated about how mere words can produce quite intense reactions. I am fascinated by the fact that postmodernism denies that there is any meaning at all because everything is imbued in meaning, thus nothing has meaning. And yet the show goes on, and I think that's the main driving force behind most of my works and behind me becoming an artist. I think me becoming an artist was this dimension of assimilation, of like finally recognizing oneself through oneself. But it was also this dimension where, despite many things that have happened to me, I felt that there was this bizarre understanding engraved in the granularity of my apprehension that has, just due to the circumstances I've grown up in, become segregated from my external personality. And that has created a very strong dissonance within me that might explain why I have always been very captivated by how the world ticks. I guess I wanted to understand because there's a lot of things within my personal trajectory that I couldn't come to terms with. One of them is that bizarre understanding that I've had since I was a child, the bizarre understanding of human nature. I could predict what people would do and how would they do it. Sometimes I contemplate how far I would have gone if I was a man. But then kind of had the real life stroke in, and my life has been funneled into a trajectory of which was ultimately a bit more pragmatic, like becoming a dentist, etc., etc., etc. And then I think upon coming to London, a lot of things did not pan out as I wanted them to. And I was kind of left with this contemplation of what has happened and how it has happened. And what does it mean? Because we only understand the world through individual and subjective narrative, and how signs and signals are conveyed within that narrative that establishes the order that we are inevitably a part of. And I think that like there is this dimension of existence that is so utterly fascinating, where one exists encapsulated within one's own bubble of interpretation and perception, and yet that bubble, whether we are aware of it or not, incessantly interacts with all the other bubbles around, and the result is the inhabited world, the actuality, the shared actuality we live in. And I think one of the things that I find quite fascinating is who perceives, first of all, I find that a hierarchical order that pervades the world. I find that very fascinating. How we choose our friends, how we choose our mates, who gets salary, higher, lower, how people dress. All of that is a part of this inevitable structure that we inhabit. And it's not solely the materialization within that exists. What is fascinating within that is that glue, that energy that kind of makes things turn whether we want it or not. For example, I needed a break from all my seriousness, and I've recently also almost finished. Like I finished my book, but I need to write the prologue, or no, epilogue. Sorry. And I've grown tired from serious thoughts and contemplation of the universe. So I kind of fell into reading manga. And what I find very fascinating about it is that the dimension of falling into something, that energy that kind of suddenly is established between me, the medium I read, the media that acts as a conductor, so pad, phone, computer, whichever you want to choose, and then that energy bubble that kind of is established between a non-living narrative, like narrative that is inscribed by a human being, and then with somebody who perceives it. So kind of just this whole dimension that you can fall into something and forget time and space is just one of those peculiarities of human existence that it's not that it is happening, but it is that it is happening at all, in a sense. The fact that we can fall into things, that we're drawn into things, that defines how we categorize our priorities, our time, our day, and dictates a rhythm, but at the same time it establishes a categorical imperative that makes up for the inhabited world. Do you do you feel the type of connection I'm trying to establish between what I'm saying and what is behind me? Do you sensing what I'm trying to?
Well, I can definitely see connections between what you're saying. It's not necessarily. I'm not sure if I necessarily. It's wrong to say disagree, but I think it's not how I would perceive things the way that you necessarily stipulate it and how you set it up. But I have a feeling that I see it more. Yeah,
In which way?
directly.
What does that mean?
It means that I don't think it's a mystery to me that these sort of things that you fall into and that you have. I think that's a result of anything that has a certain perceived will of its own, with its senses and everything. There will be certain preferences, and for those preferences to actually become something more than something else seems to me like the logical way to regulate that system. Hence, I would expect that to be so.
I guess mystical isn't what I wanted to say, but I find it utterly beautiful. I think that it's utterly beautiful that at the fundamental level we are quarks. We're quacks. At the fundamental level we're spin up and spin down quacks. But what I want to, which is a very fascinating truth.
It's a fascinating truth, but there is a lot of distance between our smallest component and what you are.
Is it though? So how can you fall into something? How can you be so mesmerized by something that one forgets that time and space exist, and you are transferred into a narrative that becomes as vivid as what we are experiencing right now?
Well, that I think has to do with a bit of different things, but in the end, I think that is immersion. I think that is much more being very present in one state at that moment in time. So you're not really interacting as fully with everything else around you at that moment in time. So it feels for you as the one that is in that state to be as such. But for someone observing you, they will feel that as the regular, normal passing of time.
Einstein, theory of relativity.
Well, you can go there, but that's not necessarily what I'm pointing at.
But that's what I'm pointing at.
Yeah, but there is no relative difference in this manner. There is no source around either of you that makes it as such that your surroundings are different. So your perception of time is the same. The absolute time between object 1 and object 2, given that you're in the same room in this instance, is the same.
Yes, but I'm talking about the apprehensive capacity of the respective subject that inherently acts within one sphere, as in reading. Doesn't have to be manga, you can read whatever. And the observer. Although they are aware of the same scenery, their apprehension of their own existence and their own coordinates is inherently quite different.
Yes, but I would call that an emergent phenomena of the internal state of the different beings, not an absolute state.
Yes, but nobody said it is absolute. What I'm speaking about is how the evolutionary development has structured our experiences in such a way that the apprehension can vary to a very high degree despite the exposure to the same scenery. I think we discussed that last time a bit.
Well, I guess in popular language, a lot of what you're describing here is being in the zone. and it is being or it's a meditative state, which is often just referred to you being so in line with the moment that you feel so absolutely immersed in what you're doing that things around doesn't interact, disrupt, grab your attention in the same way that they perhaps normally would be. And very often this is paired with enhanced performance. And once again, yes, it is fascinating that it's there, but it's also not surprising that you do have an intense state of focus that is accessible for you.
Why do you think that's unsurprising? Actually, like, writing the book, I find the state of focus. Oh my god, I should actually write a bit more about that in epilogue, or we can take it now. I think that's actually very fascinating as well. The state of focus, isn't that utterly fascinating that something as such has developed, and that is developed within the higher in the cognitive hierarchy you come, the higher it is developed.
The state of unfocused is more interesting to me than the state of focused. State of focus is the highest form of being you want in when you're performing. If you are an organism trying to get some sort of edge over your surroundings, doing something that leads to your higher chance of prevailing, focus is probably something you should be. You should be aware of what is happening around you, what is going on, what you can do differently. If that focus exists, like, just, I'll go an arbitrary direction now. I'm not sure how applicable this is, but let's take the focus of vision. All predators has a forward-leaning vision, which means that their vision is often better at judging distance, the clearness, the distance they can see, and it is more direct. They're seeing a cylinder in front of them and have to move their head to see around them, whilst prey very often have a much more rounded vision. It has higher emphasis on seeing the most around you. So it's more like a bubble around you that you're observing. Their eyes are often more on the side of their head, giving them they have a larger field of vision where they can detect anything coming into it. And these are different strategies for survival, but it makes sense that for a lot of species that the focus comes forth as an ability that would prevail more often than not. And I'm not saying that prey isn't focused. I'm just using vision to sort of make something, to take it a bit away from just words and concepts. But it's the same with prey. If an antelope is just grassing and he is fully immersed in the experience of grassing, then he's neglecting all of the threats that might be around him. So he's probably more focused on the area around him and spend a lot more time in scanning the area around him than necessarily enjoying the fresh, beautiful grass underneath him. And I think that makes sense to develop.
But why? I have two questions. The first one is how. But why are you then mesmerized more with the state of unfocused than with focus?
Well, when you're unfocused, you're obviously not obviously, but it seems that you're in some state of maybe recouping, like you're saving your energy. Like, being focused demands more energy than being unfocused. So being focused all the time and on everything you're doing would probably demand a higher caloric usage throughout the day than not, because you are actively being engaged with everything you're doing. However, being focused, of course, this comes down to the selection to what you're focused on, but given you're focused on the correct things, I would bet that there's a much higher probability for that organism prevailing compared to, let's say you have let's say you have an animal that their skill is being unfocused. It's highly unlikely that they would prevail for too long.
But here's the funny question. This is like what I kind of delve a bit in the book. And that is the fact that something as focus exists and has developed throughout the evolutionary process. And it seems that those, so state of focus, and focus is also very interesting, not only because it pertains to the particular dimension that define the task at hand, but also within the context of it involving another parameter that is external. But what is interesting to me is that if you think about how our brain functions, how if you kind of close your eyes for a second and kind of experience how it is to have thoughts, and how it is to have thoughts, and how it is to get an idea. Something similar, though on a potentially to a much lesser extent, is also something that has happened throughout the evolutionary process within the minds of the developing creatures that have emphasized this particular ability. And that particular ability does not solely pertain to the agent in question, but it pertains also to the external, to the other, whether it be a book, a manga, another human being, cooking. So suddenly you've created this ecosystem where the density, like when somebody's focused on a task, when somebody's really working hard on a task, the energy in the room or surrounding them changes. It becomes thicker in a sense. It becomes upheated or at least this is how I perceive it. Obviously, it's a merely subjective experience. So in that sense, to me, it becomes interesting to observe how human beings think that we exist solely in our heads, while the actuality is very different. Yes.
Yes, and how do you bring that further into the context of what we're speaking of?
Yeah, I will let people who are watching this to decipher how does that pertain to what is behind me. But we can start speaking a bit about the series. So let's start with the main narrative. This is it's easily describable piece.
It's still intriguing to see where you will start to describe it.
Well, I will start to describe it with the fact that we have blue and that we have red and that we have an unconscious agent and that we have the external, so the other, the blank canvas. And within such, I have moved and created something that is already readily categorized by the onlooker. You recognize the blue as letters, and you can even say that it's a background. You can question whether the white lines within those background are deliberate or are they just manifestation of the way it has been written. I can also say too that this is written by hand. So given the fact that this is written by hand without a ruler, it's decently straight. Kind of going back to me being a Virgo.
Interesting, because I wouldn't put that into the parameter at all. Like you can always put in that it conveys something about, of course, the rigidness, the correctness, and all of it. All of that is stored within it. However, it's wrong to say it's not about that, but that doesn't seem like the main purpose of it.
But of course, it's about that. The line, whether the lines are straight or wavy, and when they wave, they wave, they wave. That's isn't that a bit of what?
Yes, but you have allowed that to be as such and for that to be expressed as you would like. If you wanted that to be completely straight, it would have been quite easily to make it so.
But that's the thing. I didn't choose it to be quite straight, and already that you have the starting conversation for this piece.
Yes.
The fact that I didn't choose it to be straight. Now, why have I done that? It would. I know some artists that would definitely enjoy this work if it was straight.
I would call that the technocrats of the arts, but
Technocrats. Oh my God, you're
Technocrats,
so.
yes.
That is very beautifully said. Yes,
but
everybody has their place. Yes.
however, I would also say that to me, this piece would lose a lot of soul if that was the case. I think I don't think it would be as enjoyable.
So you think this piece has a soul?
Don't you think everything has a soul?
Are you a panpsychist?
No.
You are partial. I'm not.
You're closer than I am, but that's a dangerous category because it's such a loaded concept with so many stigmas around it.
No, but actually it pertains very well to this work. Better than you know, I think more than you can conceive of. But I'm not a panpsychist. I don't think that. I think there are dimensions of panpsychism that I definitely agree upon, and then there are dimensions where I find things less palatable.
I'm looking forward to the psychism areas of this being unveiled later on and see if I can spot the tendencies.
But let's speak about the soul. What I love about art, what initially art is very fascinating, or at least the way I'm doing art is very fascinating to me. Because it's contingent upon this dimension of transfer. Like, I'm very fascinated when you look at a work of art, in whichever dimension it exists upon, and it looks back at you. So this dimension of aliveness, of a canvas that to me a blank canvas is a live piece already on its own. But this dimension of transfer that exists, like for me, good art exists within the context of of its own recognition, where the artist has managed to transfer a dimension of its own apprehension to the canvas. And the artist can come in many forms. It doesn't have to be solely a painter. For a piece to become alive. And for a piece to resonate, like within the same dimension of way, competing in the same dimension as the structures that inherently embody the faculty of aliveness. So plants, animals, other human beings. So this dimension of transfer and peace becoming alive is something that is very fascinating for me. So when you said that this piece has a soul, I'm quite happy for that, because that means that I've achieved my attention, and my intention is to point out that it's alive. The process is alive. It seems like it's alive inherently, whether it is inherently connected to the faculty of incessant feedback loop, as it is within, again, plants, animals, human beings, or if that aliveness is a residue of the transfer that happens between the animate and inanimate. Do you get me?
Yes, I do. It's just it's one of those things that isn't necessarily that easily to measure within the normal means that we use to measure. So it's, as a concept, I do agree with you. As if it is a thing in reality it is, and it depends which language you choose, and you can definitely make arguments for it to be as such. But however, you can easily argue the other way as well. It's the entire discussion around
What's
memes
the other?
and if they are an entity of themselves.
Well, hmm. I
It's-
guess
it's
that's the
done.
part. I guess like I write about these things in the book, but what do you mean? You can see the other side. What is that other side? Or did I misunderstand something? You said that you can see how it is as such, but you can also see the alternative.
Yeah, the arguments against the process being alive and being its entity of itself.
But that's the thing, isn't it? If you imagine, we have all seen videos of a unicellular organism or cell of some kind under the microscope, and what we see is that a cell is moving. It also disturbs its environment because through the microscope, through the ways it has been colored, so we can also apprehend its environment. We can also see that through the through the means of establishing movement, it also creates a movement around itself.
I would say interact, but yes.
Interact, yes, but the plasma, I'm ether plasma. I'm just going to call it plasma just for the sake of discussion. So, but the external external part that is outside the environment is also impacted by that movement.
Yeah, but
and it's a bit like if you take a finger into water and you start spinning.
Well, yes,
The
but it's
water will spin.
happening. It's happening now as well. It's
Yes.
just that it's air, and you don't perceive it or sense it to the same granularity as you can see the medium that the cell is within in the microscope.
Obviously, but can you imagine when that happens with 7 billion people on the planet, 37 trillion cells, every single individual, not to speak about everything else that our eye perceives, because we are as a human beings, we're very used to observing things within dimension of the macro narrative. You see a house, you see a tree. Those are macro entities. Those are macro structures that are easily conceivable of and apprehended within this actuality. But what we don't think is that which granularity the world exists upon, and the forces that are created by the movement of the living agents interacting with its own environment. It's
I agree with all of this. It's just that I'm a bit undecided about my position on it.
so as such, the movement becomes also a process that is we are discussing this dimension of what is alive. Like, to me, process is alive because as soon as interaction happens, and that interaction is contingent upon the internal and the external, and with added multiplicity, to me that becomes a form of aliveness, because it has a capacity to impart its own will, and it has a capacity to sustain itself. But it has go.
Well, I'm thinking, yeah, all of the things you're saying is true, but it's not necessarily an attribution that is done by that as an entity. Like the thing is, I think I could easily convince people to that viewpoint and against it.
But that's the beauty of it, isn't it?
Yes, but that also, if
That duality.
the duality is beautiful and it's interesting, and it goes to the preciseness and vagueness of the theme being talked about. And in the end, there doesn't need to be a right or wrong. It's different ways of apprehending the world. Like if for instance, I can see how everything we're speaking of is related to the work behind, and in the end, whether or not that is, if that is how you feel it to be, or whether how you believe it to be, or if it is as such, is sort of irrelevant for that case.
But that's the thing, like the lobster, the double pincer, the neither nor both and can't be mutually excluding, but it still branches. And that's kind of what brings us back to this piece. And if you think about it, every single movement, you know what I actually love about this piece? How the way I write I and then O establish this binary code of zeros and ones throughout the canvas. You can see here and there aligning. I also enjoy the word information quite a lot, because if you think information, okay, when somebody says information, you have a very clear, I think most of the people have a very clear concept of what information is. Or how do you define information? Have you ever thought about it? How do you define information without using word information within that?
Well, of course, I'm gonna blame this now on this challenge being given on my second language. But I would say that I really do struggle to make it out without, but I definitely feel that I can define the word, and I don't see that you need to use it, but I can't quite find my vocabulary right now.
But that's the thing, neither can I, and I'm dealing with this a lot. Like, how do you define information without? How do you define information with everybody?
Google the definition of.
No, I have actually not Googled that, because it's such an interesting, like, that's a very valid point. I was thinking about it, saying, like, I'm very sad that I don't have the phone next to me now, because I would have done that. But if you kind of look at the word itself, you have information, okay? And then you have, if you start bracketing the word, you have in, formation, and then you can bracket it as information, like as in information.
Yes.
And then you can bracket it also as in format. So the word information per se seems to point towards something that has been funneled in a structure that connects and establishes connection between different dimensions of the experiential realm. Jesus, I'm good. And if this is not the definition of information, I think it should be. I'm not sure if Christian agrees here, but I'm allowed to brag.
I'm gonna say that it can. I don't know. It's probably a definition that can be used. But I was also gonna say that I have a feeling that you can use this as a one-liner. It could be something that can be attained to decipher your surroundings, or yes.
Yeah, but what does that mean? How do you decipher your surroundings?
Well, I feel that's a bigger question than what information is. Information is the package that is there that you can get, that your sensory package can use to, for your brain to build a picture or a model out of. And then how the preciseness of that depends on a lot of other things.
Information is also a very fascinating thing, isn't it? Because information is contingent upon meaning. And meaning is contingent upon subjective apprehension.
Yes.
So there would be no information. Sorry, guys. There would be no information if there was not anything to perceive meaning.
Well, yes, you need
Is
to
that
have.
true?
Well,
Do you think we're kind of going back to panpsychism again? This is very fascinating. I love it.
It holds true, and it's not quite true.
In which sense?
Well, from everything we understand, the vacuum of space doesn't contain any living beings. And my argument, if you asked, was there information in the vacuum of space before humans' time where we could observe or start to ponder what the vacuum of space is? Well, yes, there is definitely processes and things happening there. But so in that manner, but then again, it depends on what you're putting down as your observer. And as long as you have something, then there is some form of interaction happening. So if the observer is a human or the observer is a photon or it's an quark, it doesn't really matter. As long as there's interaction, there is information.
Does that mean that the process is inherently alive? Because if the process at the fundamental level has a capacity to impart meaning in the context of processing information to the respective level, does it mean that the process is alive?
To me, you're asking a definitional question now. It just depends on what you define alive as. I don't think I can agree with the definition where it is alive, and I could also the day after argue it from another side where because it just depends on which state you're looking at. If I look at it from a human perspective, I tend to lean towards it having similarities with aliveness, but probably not. But if I look at it as a concept in physics, or just as a concept on its own, not based on what is the normative definitions of aliveness, then I can, yes, there is a lot of similarities within information.
But that's the thing. If there is already something at a fundamental level that can process information, that means that that information is contingent upon conceptualization of meaning, and that meaning is again respective to the capacity of the faculty that discerns such. So it's neither. I don't think that the system exists within the state where it's neither nor, or that you can argue from one point to another. I don't think that's a good way of thinking, to be honest. I understand why it exists, because wait a second, let me finish. I understand why it exists, and I don't disagree necessarily with you that in a human everyday language that is it's an understandable choice of vantage point. However, what we have as however, that also pertains to something much more interesting to me, I think, and that is the fact that the human species has for a very long time looked upon itself as the sole carrier of the capacity to differentiate meaning. And I think that's obviously that's a very residual mindset lingering. While what I'm propagating for is not whether things exist as neither nor. I don't think things exist as binaries. There is no red pill and blue pill. The universe exists as states in between. So, and the things can only exist respective to level. So, to a level. So, for example, to our human apprehension, the way quarks deal with informational processing is a process that we would not attribute the faculty of life to. However, if we look at it from the dimension where information is being processed and as such developed within a certain dimension and led to certain outcomes, then there is a faculty there that kind of becomes amplified throughout the process of development and then subsequent evolution, culminating in the human species. And I think that's very fascinating to me, just from the vantage point of looking at how we have developed from quarks that I mean, quarks, Jesus Christ, I don't know why I've glued myself to quarks today. There are many more fundamental particles than solely quarks, so I'm sorry for that, but and fundamental forces as well. But I find it very fascinating that we have developed from that to contemplate on what we're going to wear on a Saturday night, or what type of wine do we like to drink. Like, that is a very interesting development to me.
Yes, it is. And I might have picked a bit of a poorly description when I said that you could argue, because it's not for the sake of argue that I say it. It is more to show the vagueness within the topic, that it is highly dependent on the relative point that you are speaking from, and it's a highly dependent on definition. To me, at least, it's very dependent on the definitions you are speaking from, and the definitions might alter dependent on the setting you're speaking about it. Because if you're speaking about discovering a new conscious species, well, then you might choose a different definition than in other discussions. So that's more the angle that I want to highlight in this.
But I think that's completely. I don't think you've said anything wrong. I think you're completely in your own. You're in full right to establish the view, and I think more people would potentially agree with you than they would with me. However, I apprehend process not as relativistic. I mean, yes, I do apprehend process as relativistic dimensionalities that are measured one against the another. However, I look at it as much more fluid process, where it goes through means of nuancing from faint to amplified. For example, I think a lot of things that have truly made me understand the universe is really art. And what I mean by that is that if you think about the color, like if we take yellow, and cadmium lemon yellow is one of my favorite shades, is that if I dilute it, it's still cadmium yellow, but its intensity varies. So if I were to compare diluted cadmium yellow brushed against the white canvas with the one that it's not, then you would never call the cadmium yellow the one that the pale one. You will call the one that has the strongest color, that represents the pure color within the designated term. However, the other one would have potentially a different name of a nuance. However, both of them, and that's the beauty of it, I think, the both of them exist under the umbrella of the title of cadmium yellow. However, for the sake of differentiation, we have attributed different names to the different shades that emerge or that are materialized as autonomous entities existing within the respective capacity, because in between completely diluted cadmium yellow and it at its full chroma, there is so many shades that have their own respective names.
And which relevancy does this have to this?
Kind of like the fundamental particles for me exhibit this dimension of informational processing that, compared to what we call being alive, is not in the same, doesn't exist in the same capacity, but exists as a diluted shade of the concept that becomes amplified throughout the development and then subsequent evolution to the point where we have the capacity to discuss this at all.
But aliveness is just, again, a definition.
Just. Is aliveness just?
Yes.
If something is just, why don't we see more of it? If it deserves such a blatant word.
Because the definition that we have placed on it is fairly strict. Does it enrich us by calling a brick house alive? In any way? Does that change anything for our perception of it? Because then we would add something else to ourselves. because then we wouldn't just be alive, then we would add something else that we would use to segregate us from it. So I do understand this. One can always attribute this to fundamental particles, but if we go as far to say that every fundamental particle is alive, then we have now concluded that everything in the universe is alive. What did we learn in this endeavor?
Yeah, what did we learn in this endeavor?
Well, we definitely know there's life everywhere. So going to Mars looking for life.
Let's go back to this piece. So what has happened? How did this piece come about? So I, an alive agent, I am definitely sure that I am alive. I'm speaking and I'm thinking.
There's a lot of counter arguments to this as well, but yes, let's go ahead.
Are we going to discuss that? But
no,
what I want to say,
you could be a simulation. You could be all things in between. So,
but they're not. None of that is mutually exclusive.
Yes, but then you're again alive by a certain sets of definitions and parameters.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean if this world is simulated and you have one world behind which is organically real, then by their definition of alive, you are not alive. You might have properties that is reminiscent of conscious to those who have made it, but it doesn't mean that you are.
But that's the thing.
Yes, this is a sidetrack. We don't need to jump into this. You are alive, most definitely, and you have created it.
And I have picked up something that I think would be defined as an inanimate object with capacity for transfer or making transfer visible, and have created something where I have time after time stood in front and have been writing. So what have I been writing? I have been inscribing information. I've also created a bit of a video for this series where you see me inscribe something, and I start from lying on the floor, and then I go further and further up, and then at the end of the performance, you kind of see that I've been inscribing the word information.
Was it a conscious choice that you started at the bottom?
In a sense, that's such a funny question. I was about to say evolution started at the bottom. Everything starts at the bottom. But for this girl, I usually start in the middle. I'll tell you a funny story. So I love pancakes, crepe, like the French version. And me and my father used to make that a lot when we needed some bonding time. And when I would roll them up, so I would roll them, like make a tiny roll, and then you, how do you call them, like brette?
You bend them or wrap them,
you bend them, you put two and together, so you got a kind of like this U sign. So this girl, like normal people start with the loose ends, right? You start with the out stickers, right? This girl turned around her pancake and ate the middle first. And then I had two separate pieces that I ate separately.
Yeah, I don't think that's... I can see arguments for both of these approaches as well.
It's not that, but you asked me where did I start. I was like, and I actually, it's very funny because most of the artworks I create, I start with painting things in the middle. And then I go... I'm not going to reveal which direction I go. Yeah. But in this instance... I thought that it was very important for me to start at the bottom. And I think...
In other words, conscious thought to you starting where you started.
In this particular instance, it was, yes. But I also think how beautifully and poignantly that kind of a really connects to this dimension of evolution, but also to this to something so inherently human as well. You know, when you come to a big city and you want to work, for example, me becoming an art, well, not me becoming, I am an artist, but me attempting to place my works within significant dimensions. You start at the bottom, don't you? You start laying down and then you slowly get up. And if I think that also already on its own points toward something quite spectacular on its own. But what do you have? You say that the canvas has soul, and if it has its soul, then it has to be. I know this is figuratively speaking, but art has soul. Art is alive. It has a capacity. Well, we can discuss that. Don't worry, we're here. We're fine. I mean, you can just look forward to the next piece. We're going to discuss free will. But let's go back for a second to this particular thing. Like, I'm not sure how many of you have noticed the particular choice of color is not. It's a conscious choice. And the lobster is also a consciously chosen emblem or a sign, signifier of something. Trace. So within this dimension, this piece exists as an extension where I have transferred my movement, my thoughts, how hard I'm pushing, how hard I'm pressing to the piece. And all of that is inscribed there. Every single movement, every single breath, every single thing that I exist within is inscribed. Or every single experience that I've had while I was creating this piece exists inscribed within this piece. And I find that very fascinating.
I agree with you there, but I also think that so does it on every other piece you have ever created.
So does every piece that any artist has ever created.
Yes, so this is what living is. Living is that transcription all the time.
Transcription, yeah.
Transcription all the time. However, what I really do like about this is that you have chosen to do it in a linguistical way and symbolic way at the same time, and you have used the word that points it out almost most glaringly that this is actually what is happening. And you didn't just make a tiny piece that you could easily hold in your hand and take on your arm and walk away. You made it this big, where it is transcribed so many times over and over and over again to re-emphasize that all of this information, of lack of better words, is always within there and communicated to you when you are interacting with these. And that's what I think is so fantastic about this, all these dimensions playing together.
That's exactly, because, and we're kind of going back to the thing that I contemplate. Like, I'm looking at this world and I'm in utter disbelief what kind of mess it is. Again, Virgo with the moon in Capricorn, with the Leo cusp. I mean, you gotta love it. But what I'm trying to say is that this world is an utter mess, and if we look at individual lives, we'll call it a human life. Everybody has their ups and downs, argues. We go to the restaurants, we discuss, you do X, Y, and Z. Human life is inherently quite uniform, although the respective dimensions that pertain to the individual experience are obviously are experienced as unique, inherently unique to the agent that embodies such, that is experiencing such. Essentially, there's nothing unique. You walk, you eat, you chew, you fall in love, you talk, you go to a restaurant, you change your clothes, you shower, people have children, go to school. You know, like, essentially, if one thinks about the human life, as diverse as it can be, it's also contained within few concepts. And all of them are centered around the human capacity to expand their own experience towards towards some kind of improvement. And yet we are here. We are drinking microplastic. Half of the world is
In poverty.
in poverty. Half of the world also has, for example, rubbish disposal systems. I'm not going to talk about that, but it's, you know. And we all think that, and this piece is made so glaringly obvious because we all know that in every single moment, what we're doing pertains to a form of information. And yet here we are. And that's where things kind of start becoming interesting, because a lot of my work up to this point has kind of dealt with quite glaring emblems. Not glaring, but quite obvious emblems. And yet, when you kind of start scratching the narrative, one starts to understand that we actually do not understand what's happening and what's going on, and we don't, you say that human beings are conscious and alive, but that only pertains to the states where we actually are. What happens when we zone out? What happens when we sleep? What happens, how can we define consciousness and aliveness when that even those faculties vary greatly amongst the individuals on a geographical and economical and social scale. And that's this dimension of categorization that exists, which inherently pertains to how information is structured on differentiated levels, that becomes a fascinating topic to me.
Yes.
Yes, that's what I had to say, I guess, about
this informative piece.
Well, about this informative piece, because ultimately it exists as a inscription, not solely of what I wanted to create within that moment, but it also acts as a token of all the words, thoughts, dimensions that have kind of occurred within the scope of my existence prior to its existence. So as such, it's not only inscription of information, it also acts as a token, as a summary of a lot of dimensions that I wanted to express. And another obvious point is that I think that by now you have kind of a quote gist that my early work is also highly contingent upon the exchange of signifiers, because information is conveyed through different means. I look at you, you're wearing a blue t-shirt. That to somebody who has dealt with fashion, that speaks something, that has meaning. You're wearing a cap. The form of that cap has special meaning to me. It's not just a cap. So I have visual apprehension of the narrative, but then that apprehension also pertains to every sensorial input that is interpreted through the means of the five senses that exist. But in the context of externalizing the information that I myself have apprehended, I've ended up substituting the visual with the linguistic. Because if you think about it, this piece, if it would to be translated into visual, I mean, it's such a beautiful piece. It's such a beautiful piece because inherently it connects. Oh, it's such a gorgeous piece. Because if you think about the blue, what is blue? Let's start with the red. Lobsters are red. We know that lobsters are red, or at least the cooked ones. I think the less cooked, those ones that are not cooked are not as red, if I'm not mistaken.
So now we have learned that in Irina's world, lobsters are perceived as cooked.
Yes, unfortunately, I don't think. I think, you know what? I don't think I often think about lobsters before they're cooked. I mean, I don't eat shellfish, but lobsters are red inherently, right? And where do lobsters live? Well, they live in the sea. They live in the water, and even when they come out as red, they are cooked in the water. Okay, cool. So they're cooked in the water, and water is often represented as blue. So we kind of have this dichotomy between blue and red that also wraps up, that also kind of exists as the natural milieu of the signals, of the symbol that exists as the main motive of this work. But at the same time, it pertains to something, to a binary that I think a lot of us are really well acquainted with. And as such establishes its own ecosystem of the informational processing loop that not solely tells you about something about me, but it also tells you something about you. Because ultimately, every single piece that you experience as an onlooker becomes the mirror of your own thoughts. It becomes a discussion between you and an artist about the things that the artist has said to himself, herself, itself. The artist has said to the self. The dimension what the artist wanted to convey. And then you have this dimension where the onlooker has the conversation. So as such, the ecosystem of aliveness, of the informational processing, we spoke about, last time we spoke about the cursing of the
child.
Yes, and the double name. And whether the information can be transferred through such means. Art is not a proof that that can happen, but it definitely points out that the extended transfer exists. For example, if enough people incite for a certain, let's simplify this. If you go to a cafe, people want to go to cafes that have a good vibe. Now, how does that good vibe come about? What is a good vibe? How do you see that? How do you perceive that? How we all know what good vibe is. I think a lot of people know how a good vibe is established. And yet, I don't think a lot of people think about how they are in their own way contributing to that, because a vibe is also information. It's information contained within a room. And we're going back again to that dimension where this is air, but we're not in air. Like, this is not nothing. It's like amber. It's like ether. You move. It's like going back to my microscope and my small microbes moving, like my cells moving. Like they move within external space that is also affected by that movement. Yes.
Yes.
Then the question is, do we know what we're inscribing?
Well, that's the question people are left with, aren't they? It's the conscious. Are you consciousness? Are you conscious, and are you aware of what you are transcribing?
Are we? Because I can actually kind of think that that's the most fascinating dimension of human existence. Because if you kind of look at the movies, we know what's at. All of us know what's at, and all of us know how things should be and how they can be. And this is not should in a preaching way. I think what I wanted to say should be is that it's completely within our capacity to stop using plastic. It's completely within our capacity to stop violence. It's completely within our capacity to stop the nastiness that is a residue of our ancestral.
But is it though? If it is, wouldn't we already have done so?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Why do we constantly project that we know better while we do something else?
Yeah, but then you come back to, could we really? Is it in our power to just stop it?
Isn't it? If we know better,
Well,
isn't it?
knowing and executing seems fairly. There's a lot of people that knows that stealing is wrong, but they're still doing it. Because their situation, because there's a lot more to it than just their ethics. There's a lot more to their surroundings and everything around them. Like, if your life is in danger, and you need to make a tiny breach at something, that tiny breach is easy to argue for, which is an extreme example, because most of the things you're speaking of isn't of that variety. However, as long as the person in power that have reached such a position that they are able to, that their bubble has a bigger impact and ability to form the local area around them, or even the bigger, even the larger global area around them, might be functioning under a different connection and have different coding that makes their decision become different to what we are originally thinking, which might lead to these things. But they might also make the same scenario as for the person who stole an apple because he needed food. They might make that same scenario in a much grander scale for why they might need to make their business a 500 billion business compared to a 250.
Yes, but that's exactly that. And through this dimension, I mean, we are at the point no return. I think that's the most fascinating thing for me, that we have deliberately said over and over again that atrocities, that the residual animal self comes forth, are much more important than all the knowledge that evolutionary process has bestowed upon us. That's fascinating to me. Again, working in the fashion industry has been a very fascinating the existence, because of the sheer accumulation and lacking means of circularity that allows for improvement of the world. And like, you incessantly see how a machinery perpetuates itself to the detriment, to the overall detriment, and yet we constantly allow it. Like, and this is not about shaming or preaching in that sense. What I'm trying to say is that I love clothes. Like, I absolutely love cute outfits. Oh my god, Etsy, yes please. And I constantly keep reminding myself that I have to refrain myself from such a behavior, which I do as well to a certain extent, to resist buying things, because I know that I don't need it, and will it make me more happy at in a particular moment? Yes. But the fact that I know how the disposal works, I see so overcrowded bins everywhere. It puts a very unpleasant feeling, but it's also that feeling that makes me aware of this dichotomy existing. And I often wonder, how would it be to be able to go out in the big city and not smell the dust and not smell the petrol? How would it be that one doesn't have to constantly fight for clean water? Like, I'm very fascinated about what's going to happen with how we're going to deal with this dimension of microplastic, because that's going to be, and whether it becomes like again a social and economical issue, where those that have those that have ability to build I was about to say water refineries, but there is a better word for that.
Filtration systems.
Yes, filtration systems. How will that impact the humanity and development of species? Will we, going back also to the food, will we branch? I mean, we are already branching, but I think this particular division can be a very interesting one in 200 years time, to a millennia. And then the fact that we have done that consciously becomes a very fascinating topic to me.
Yes, I can see that.
Yeah, because the question becomes, we all know that we exist within this dimension of informational processing, but do we know what type of information we're inscribing? Do we know the granularity that exists within? This piece, for example, I also enjoy that this piece exists within the dimension of different sizes, the font being different sizes. That's also a tell of something.
It's different expressions. I think you're highlighting a lot of interesting thoughts and a lot of interesting angles on things, but I almost think that some of the topics are too big to tackle in this episode and might deserve a future episode of their own.
Oh, I mean, of course, definitely.
Because I have things to say to them, but they're not something that can be said without adding another 60 minutes to the episode.
All right, people. But then we will leave you for the time being. I hope that we have incited some interesting thoughts for you. I also I hope that during my process, I've become a bit of a green warrior. And I'm not particularly apologetic for the push that I am providing in the narrative that you're listening to. But I do hope that this episode will leave you a bit more with a residue that will make you kind of think twice or thrice before one slices the time.
All right. And with that,
yes,
we'll end on that.
Thank you for listening. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.